At the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, most of the great powers that dominated the world were located in Europe. Outside of Europe, there were only secondary powers. The United States was a newly emerging power at the time. Although it was strong economically and industrially, it had not yet developed a powerful military capable of making it a global superpower. Moreover, the United States followed a policy of isolationism and non-intervention in foreign affairs. America believed it was secure because it was protected by two vast oceans, the Pacific Ocean to the west and the Atlantic Ocean to the east. As a result, it paid little attention to international affairs, especially those outside the American continent. In Asia, Japan was also a newly emerging power. However, unlike the United States, Japan abandoned its isolationist policy and adopted imperialism, similar to the European powers. Even so, Japan, at that time, was only a regional power and had not yet developed the military strength to become a global power like the European nations. In Europe, there were 5 major powers competing with one another, eventually leading to the outbreak of World War I. These powers were Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and Austro-Hungary. Among them, the most powerful was the British Empire, which was the world's leading power from the 19th century into the early 20th century, similar to the role played by the United States in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. However, toward the end of the 19th century, a new power emerged to challenge Britain: Germany. Before 1870, Germany was not yet unified and was divided into many independent states. Among them, Prussia was the largest and militarily strongest. Otto von Bismarck, appointed Chancellor of Prussia in 1862 by King Wilhelm I, was a conservative politician who aimed to unify Germany into a powerful nation. To achieve this goal, Bismarck devised a strategy to provoke a war with France, which was seen as a common enemy by the German states. Hostility toward France had existed since the time of Napoleon Bonaparte. Bismarck understood that to unite the German people through nationalism, they needed to see France as the aggressor. He therefore created tensions with France, eventually provoking Emperor Napoleon III to declare war on Prussia in July 1870. Bismarck then persuaded all the German states to unite against what he described as French aggression. The unified German forces defeated France in 1871. After this victory, Germany was unified into an empire under Emperor Wilhelm I, with Bismarck as chancellor. At that time, Germany became a major economic and industrial power. However, it aspired to become equal to other global powers. Unlike Britain and France, Germany lacked overseas colonies. Therefore, it pursued colonial expansion, particularly in Africa and the Asia-Pacific region, believing that colonies would provide markets and natural resources and elevate Germany's global status. Germany's expansion brought it into conflict with established colonial powers, especially Britain and France. Competition among European powers intensified, leading to military buildups and an arms race, particularly naval competition between Germany and Britain. At the same time, European powers formed alliances. In 1879, Germany and Austria-Hungary formed a dual alliance. 3 years later, Italy joined, forming the Triple Alliance. In response, France formed alliances with Russia in 1892 and with Britain in 1904. By 1907, Britain and Russia also allied, creating the Triple Entente of France, Britain, and Russia. These two opposing alliance systems, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy versus France, Britain, and Russia, became the main sides in World War I, 1914 to 1918. More than 100 years later, the causes of World War I remain debated among historians. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary in June 1914 was the immediate trigger. However, the deeper causes had developed over decades, including rivalry among European powers and rising nationalism. The roots of the conflict can be traced back to 1871, after the Franco-Prussian War. Germany's victory led to its unification and rise as a powerful empire. France, having lost the war, was forced to cede the region of Alsace-Lorraine to Germany. This loss created resentment and a desire for revenge among the French. Mutual distrust, competition for colonies, and military rivalries drove European nations to strengthen their armies and form complex alliances in preparation for possible war. Meanwhile, tensions in the Balkans escalated after the decline of the Ottoman Empire. Former territories began declaring independence, leading to competition among neighboring states for control. In 1908, Austria-Hungary annexed Bosnia, a former Ottoman territory. This angered Serbia, which shared ethnic and cultural ties with Bosnia. Russia, an ally of Serbia, also opposed the annexation. The Bosnia crisis deepened tensions between Austria-Hungary and Russia. The situation worsened further during the Balkan Wars of 1912 to 1913. In 1912, four former Ottoman territories, Serbia, Greece, Montenegro, and Bulgaria, formed the Balkan League to fight the Ottoman Empire. Within months, they defeated it and seized large territories. However, conflict soon broke out among the allies themselves, particularly between Bulgaria and Serbia and Greece over how to divide the conquered lands. After the Balkan Wars ended in August 1913, Serbia became the strongest military power in the Balkans. The balance of power in the region shifted toward Russia, which made Austria-Hungary dissatisfied. As a result, Austria-Hungary sought to take all possible measures to prevent Serbia from further increasing its influence in the Balkans. On the morning of June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, traveled by train to Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia. Bosnia had been annexed by Austria-Hungary from the Ottoman Empire in 1908, which had angered Serbia. At that time, a group of 7 Serbian nationalist youths, supported by a Serbian terrorist organization, planned to assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand. They positioned themselves along the route where his motorcade would pass. Although the Archduke knew that the visit to Sarajevo was dangerous, he chose to ride in an open-top car to show friendliness to the local people. Around 10 a.m., as his motorcade passed, one of the assassins threw a bomb at his car. However, it missed and exploded under a following vehicle. The driver quickly sped away and took the Archduke to Sarajevo City Hall. The attacker attempted suicide, but failed and was arrested by the police. At City Hall, Archduke Franz Ferdinand attended the official ceremony as planned. However, afterward, he decided to cancel the remaining events and visit those injured in the earlier bombing at a hospital in Sarajevo. On the way to the hospital, he and his wife, Duchess Sophie, were shot and killed by another assassin. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia for the assassination and declared war on Serbia on July 28, 1914. Due to a complex system of alliances, this conflict quickly spread to other major European powers, including Germany, Italy, Britain, France, and Russia. The causes of World War I in 1914 were rooted in many long-standing issues, such as the Franco-Prussian War, 1870 to 1871. The rise of the German Empire with ambitions to become a colonial power, the growth of nationalism across Europe, the arms race between Germany and Britain, and the formation of rival alliances. However, the immediate trigger of the war was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914. Sarajevo was a city in Bosnia that Austria-Hungary had taken from the Ottoman Empire, which angered Serbia. Since the assassination was carried out by Serbian nationalists, Austria-Hungary and several other countries blamed Serbia. Austria-Hungary, already in conflict with Serbia, used the event as a pretext to eliminate its rival and suppress nationalism in Bosnia. However, because Serbia was supported by Russia, Austria-Hungary hesitated to declare war immediately. It first sought assurance from Germany that it would provide support in case of Russian military intervention, according to their alliance agreement. On July 23, 1914, after receiving Germany's guarantee, Austria-Hungary sent an official ultimatum to Serbia, giving it only 48 hours to comply with 10 demands. Some of these demands were extremely difficult to fulfill within such a short time, while others violated Serbia's sovereignty. In reality, the ultimatum was largely a formality, as Austria-Hungary had already decided to go to war. On July 25, 1914, Serbia responded, agreeing to most of the demands but rejecting a few that compromised its sovereignty. Unsatisfied, Austria-Hungary declared war on July 28, 1914. Because of existing alliances, the war quickly expanded. Russia began mobilizing its army to support Serbia. In response, Germany mobilized its forces and issued a 12-hour ultimatum demanding that Russia halt its military preparations. When no satisfactory response was received, Germany declared war on Russia on August 1, 1914. Germany also demanded that France remain neutral, but France refused, stating it would act in its own national interest. On August 3rd, Germany declared war on France, and the following day, Britain, France's ally, declared war on Germany. Japan, allied with Britain, declared war on Germany and Austria-Hungary on August 23rd and 25th. Germany launched a two-front war, attacking France in the west while defending against Russia in the east. On August 4th, German forces invaded Belgium to advance into France from the north. Meanwhile, French forces attempted to attack Germany in the east to reclaim Alsace-Lorraine, but were pushed back. In the north, German troops advanced through Belgium into France, approaching Paris. However, they were stopped about 70 kilometers from the city by French and British forces. It was at this point that trench warfare began, with both sides digging trenches and launching attacks from their positions. This trench warfare, known in French as Guerre des Tranchées, lasted for about 3 years, covering most of World War I. It caused devastating losses on both sides, with millions of soldiers killed or wounded. At the start of the war in 1914, Germany faced two fronts, France and Britain in the west, and Russia in the east. While Germany initially advanced through Belgium toward France, it had to divert significant forces to counter Russian advances in eastern Germany and Poland. By late August, German and Austro-Hungarian forces managed to halt the Russian advance. However, dividing their forces weakened Germany on the Western Front, allowing French and British forces to stop their advance toward Paris. For the next 3 years, World War I remained largely a stalemate, with neither side achieving a decisive victory. On the Western Front, German and French forces faced each other in trench warfare. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, German and Russian troops fought back and forth, with neither side able to completely defeat the other. However, by the end of 1917, a major development occurred on the Eastern Front. The Russian population, mostly poor workers and peasants, grew increasingly tired of the war. Opposition to the Russian autocratic monarchy intensified, eventually leading to a revolution that overthrew Tsar Nicholas II and established a communist government led by Lenin in October 1917. Immediately after coming to power, Lenin decided to withdraw Russia from World War I and began peace negotiations with Germany and its allies in December 1917. Russia's withdrawal greatly relieved Germany, allowing it to redirect its forces to the Western Front in France. At that time, although France and Britain lost Russia as an ally, they gained a new one, the United States, which entered World War I in 1917. Before the war, the United States believed it was geographically secure, protected by 2 vast oceans, and followed a policy of isolationism, avoiding involvement in foreign conflicts. From the outbreak of the war in 1914 until 1917, President Woodrow Wilson tried to maintain neutrality to keep the United States out of the European conflict. Most Americans supported this peaceful stance. However, Germany eventually drew the United States into the war. In an attempt to strangle Britain's economy, Germany used submarines to carry out unrestricted attacks on ships traveling to and from Britain. In May 1915, a German submarine sank a large British passenger ship, killing more than 1,000 people, including over 120 Americans. This incident caused serious diplomatic tensions between the United States and Germany. Although the U.S. protested, it did not immediately take further action. Still, American public opinion began to turn against Germany. In January 1917, as the war dragged on longer than expected, Germany intensified its unrestricted submarine warfare, targeting all ships entering or leaving countries at war. This meant that ships crossing the Atlantic between the United States and Britain were also at risk of being attacked without warning. 3 days after this announcement, the United States severed diplomatic relations with Germany. However, it still did not immediately enter the war. It was not until April 1917, after German submarines sank 4 American merchant ships, that President Wilson asked Congress to declare war on Germany. By November of that year, American troops began arriving in France to support French and British forces against Germany. At that time, the United States was not yet a major military power. Its army was relatively small, inexperienced, and not well equipped. However, its intervention was crucial. The U.S. had the capacity to mobilize millions of soldiers quickly. While European armies had already suffered heavy physical and psychological losses after more than 3 years of stalemate, American troops represented fresh strength. With this new support, France and Britain began to gain the advantage. In August 1918, Allied forces launched a large-scale offensive, gradually pushing German forces out of France. Facing defeat on nearly all fronts, Germany agreed to negotiate and signed an armistice on November 11, 1918. The war officially ended with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles in France on June 28, 1919. Although fighting stopped on November 11, 1918, at 11 a.m., the formal peace agreement came months later. After more than 4 years of war, World War I caused devastating consequences. Around 17 million people died, including about 10 million soldiers and 7 million civilians, and approximately 20 million were wounded. Germany and France suffered the most damage. The war also caused severe economic destruction, especially to infrastructure and the labor force. Many countries spent enormous sums, mostly borrowed money, to finance the war. After the war, they faced massive debts and reconstruction costs, while economic growth remained weak due to labor shortages. To cope, many governments printed large amounts of money, leading to extreme inflation, especially in Germany. By 1923, the German mark had become nearly worthless, with trillions of marks needed to equal $1. While Europe struggled economically, the United States emerged as a new global economic power, having lent billions of dollars to European nations. The world's financial center shifted from London to New York. World War I also brought major geopolitical changes. Monarchies collapsed across Europe, including the German, Austro-Hungarian, Russian, and Ottoman empires. These empires broke apart into new countries such as Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Finland, and others in the Baltic region and the Middle East. In Germany, the monarchy of Kaiser Wilhelm II was replaced by the Weimar Republic. The region of Alsace-Lorraine was returned to France. Germany was also forced to pay massive reparations and reduce its military to 100,000 troops. It was banned from producing heavy weapons such as tanks, aircraft, and large warships. These restrictions aimed to prevent future aggression, but they ultimately failed. Many Germans viewed the Treaty of Versailles as unfair, and the government eventually began secretly rebuilding its military. The League of Nations was created to maintain global peace, but it was weak and ineffective, especially since major powers like the United States did not join. About 20 years later, in 1939, World War II broke out, causing even greater destruction. After World War I, Czechoslovakia was formed, and around 3 million ethnic Germans lived there, mainly in the Sudetenland. In September 1938, Adolf Hitler encouraged local German leaders to demand that this region be separated and annexed to Germany. Czechoslovakia refused, and Hitler threatened war, claiming he wanted to protect ethnic Germans. Britain and France, still recovering from World War I, tried to avoid another conflict. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain met Hitler and agreed to give Germany parts of the Sudetenland, with a majority German population, without consulting Czechoslovakia. Later, Hitler demanded the entire region. Eventually, Britain, France, Germany, and Italy signed the Munich Agreement on September 30, 1938, allowing Germany to annex the Sudetenland. In return, Hitler promised no further territorial expansion. However, in March 1939, Hitler broke his promise and occupied the rest of Czechoslovakia. Britain and France realized they had been deceived and abandoned their policy of appeasement. After Hitler demanded territory from Poland, Britain and France guaranteed Poland's independence. Nevertheless, Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany, marking the beginning of World War II. In modern times, the crisis in Ukraine has drawn comparisons to these events. In 2014, Russia, under Vladimir Putin, annexed Crimea, claiming to protect ethnic Russians, similar to Hitler's justification in 1938. However, ethnic Russians live not only in Crimea, but also in other parts of Ukraine and former Soviet states. This raises an important question. Does Putin plan to expand further under the same justification?